We are going head to head with the AnCnoc Peatheart and the Bruichladdich Octomore 8.1. Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and while reviewing the AnCnoc Peatheart, I got sort of a sense of deja vu of the Bruichladdich Octomore 8.1. So doing comparison between Highland peated single malt whiskeys and Islay single malt peated whiskeys, want to find whiskeys that are similar or a fair comparison. Does it make any sense to compare, say, peated Scotch whiskeys with bourbons, something in completely two different categories? You want to go similar, like to like. You want to compare quality, you want to compare similarities, you want to compare prices, and of course, you want to compare and find out, does a whiskey coming from the Highlands that's peated be significantly or recognizably different than a whiskey coming from the Islay? So that's the purpose of this. Now, these are two very, very challenging whiskeys to get, particularly if you're here in the United States. One, because of it's not available, not regularly sold in the United States. And the other because it has pretty much, for the most part, gone off the market. Now you're looking at secondaries and you're looking at higher prices. But before I get into these two whiskeys, here are my notes. The AnCnoc Peatheart Highland single malt Scotch whisky, produced by Knockdo Distilling in Aberdeenshire, is made from 100% malted barley, peated at 40 ppm, non-chill filtered, natural color, bottled at 46% alcohol by volume, and if you can get it in the United States, you're going to pay, in terms of after all the other fees, you're going to pay about $120 in the United States. Then the Octomore 8.1 Islay single malt Scotch whisky, produced at Bruichladdich Distillery on Islay, also 100% malted barley, but it's peated at 167 ppm, so much higher. However, what it's peated at before it goes into the still can be somewhat relative. A lot can go on in terms of what happens to the peat during distillation, as well as aging and all that. So what matters is really the ppm after aging, not primarily before distillation. But it is interesting to note that the two different barleys are at extremely different ppms, and yet I think they have certain things in common. It was aged for 8 years in first fill American oak casks, including Buffalo Trace, Claremont Springs, Four Roses, Heaven Hill, and Jack Daniels. It is also non-chill filtered, has natural color. It is bottled at 59.3% alcohol by volume, which is a lot more than the AnCnoc. And originally it was sold for $175 to $200 here in the United States. But if you can find it, I've seen it now as high as $300. Alrighty, so first of all, look at the two bottles. The bottles themselves have a similar idea, is that they're these sort of opaque black bottles, not shiny, what we say, sort of flat black bottles. So they have a similar idea in terms of their approach of how they're going to do their bottles, and then both using gold lettering. Just interesting in terms of the similarity between the how they are thinking about their whiskeys and how they're going to portray them in the bottles. Visually in the glass, not too much different. The AnCnoc is a little bit lighter, slightly lighter green color, looks a little bit like a young Ardbeg. The Bruichladdich has a little bit darker color, a little bit more of a sort of a copper, a bronze color there. On the nose, in terms of the intensity of the smoke and the peat, very, 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 very similar, which is surprising given the fact that the ppm on the Octomore is much higher. But, of course, the ppm, as I already said, really, really counts after aging as to the intensity of the peat. You know, what it is before it even goes into the still can radically be changed along the distillation process and the aging process. Perhaps the AnCnoc is a little bit more ashy, and there perhaps is just a slightly bit slightly more briny note of the Octomore 8.1. In terms of fruit characteristics, the AnCnoc has a little bit more of a lime color, a little bit more aromas, a little more of a green apple, and I would say maybe even smells a little bit younger. The Bruichladdich has a little bit more of a savory note, more of a grilled stone fruit, and a little bit more of a charred, smoky character to it. Both of them have a slight salty character to it. These are subtle differences. These aren't major difference between these two. The AnCnoc Peatheart, a little more ashy. This, the Octomore, is a little bit more of a charred wood character in terms of the smoke. But these are just real subtle differences. All right, on the palate. Fruit characteristics: lemon, lime, green apple. That smoke and peat really kicks in. It's really well integrated. A little bit of saltiness, a lot of chocolate going on in there. Maybe a little bit more of a milk chocolate. On the back end, it's a little more ashy with a little bit of saltiness. Let's drink some water and try the Octomore 8.1. When drinking water in between two different whiskeys, I don't just drink the water, I sort of swish in the mouth, sort of try to rinse my mouth really well. All right, the Octomore. First, the intensity of the smoke and the peat on the palate, pretty much the same. The character of the peat, however, or the smoke, just as on the nose, a little bit more of a charred character, and a little bit more of a savory character. They both have a very significant chocolate character. Maybe the Octomore is a little bit more of a dark chocolate, whereas the Peatheart is a little more of a milk chocolate. Both of them have a salty character, if it's there. And I'm wondering if it could be just psychological, because I know it's from Islay. There is the most minuscule amount of a brandy character coming from the Octomore, but it may be just because I know it's from Islay. Both of these whiskeys have sort of a eucalyptus mint character on the follow through, but it's a minor note. So both, in terms of the intensity of the peat, even though the ppms are completely different in terms of on the barley before going into distillation, radically different, the alcohol on the Octomore 1 is a lot higher, and yet it doesn't come across as any more of a bite. It doesn't have necessarily more heavy mouthfeel than does the Peatheart. However, peat, I have noticed, tends to sort of tame the bite of alcohol. So a lot of peated whiskeys can get away with having a higher alcohol and not having such a high, a strong bite, which is why I kind of tend more towards cask strength of those higher ABV peated whiskeys than I do other whiskeys. More water and we'll go back. These are very similar. I would say peat levels, in terms of intensity, smoke and all that, so close you can't tell the difference. Both of them have a minty character on the back end. A minuscule note, the AnCnoc Peatheart is slightly more ashy, whereas the Octomore is slightly more of a charred wood barbecue character. This has more of a fresh green apple, pear, lemon, lime character. This has much more of a grilled stone fruit character. Both have a chocolate character. The Peatheart is a little bit more of a milk chocolate. This is a bit more of a dark chocolate. Both have a salty note and both have a smoky, long finish. But these differences between them, it's not like a radical difference where we go, oh wow, this is so different than these are minor differences. I would say the Octomore 8.1 is slightly more, has a lot more change and development in the profile, and it's slightly more complex. It also seems a little bit older, I mean just slight, than the Peatheart. This seems to be a little bit more youthless. Other than that, very, very similar. Now here's the big challenge. If I was doing blind and I had to sort of try to figure out which one's from Islay and which one was from the Highlands, could I do it? I would say no. Both of these equally is come across as an Islay character. However, they don't have the Laphroaig, Lagavulin, Ardbeg character of that intense oceanic, briny, medicinal character. Neither one of these have those characteristics, but then neither does necessarily Kalila or other peated whiskeys from Islay. But they don't have that sort of flag, that characteristic that you expect from a lot of Islay peated whiskeys. So, tasted blind, I would not know necessarily that the AnCnoc Peatheart is from the Highlands, whereas this one is from Islay. They're just too similar. They're just stylistically different whiskeys in terms of the casks that were used, but in terms of the peat, the salt, and the overall the development of the flavor of the whiskeys, very, very, very similar. The main difference really is, I would say in terms of flavor-wise, this is a little, the Octomore is slightly a little more savory, a little bit more of a barbecue charred note, where this is a little more fresh fruit, apple, pear, green apple, maybe even a little bit of a tropical note as well. But we're talking the differences are fairly minor. Now, big issue is, which one would I prefer? I like the Octomore 8.1 more than I do the AnCnoc Peatheart. However, these are both fantastic whiskeys. AnCnoc Peatheart, I would go 89 points. Octomore 8.1, I'm probably going to go like 91, 92 points. So it does get above that 90 point range. However, how much do they cost? Even including the shipping costs, we're talking Octomore 8.1 in terms of the original price, $175 to $200, although now I see it now for $300 if you can track one down. Even with the shipping costs, and the tariffs of having to bring it over from the UK, the AnCnoc Peatheart was still only $118. So even with that, I would rather buy the AnCnoc Peatheart than the Octomore 8.1. Now, if you're over in the UK and you're in the EU and you're not having to pay all those shipping costs, and you can pick this up for £40, then essentially you can get four, if you can track them down, you can get 4 of these Peathearts for the price of one Octomore 8.1. And hands down, I mean, absolutely, I would buy a bunch of Peathearts before buying the Octomore. The Peatheart really is a great value play, especially if you're in Europe or the EU, because it's an absolutely beautiful, superb, delicious whiskey. Absolutely, I love these both. But in terms of a value play, the Peatheart is where it's at. Alrighty, if you like watching my videos, you've not yet subscribed, I'm going to ask that you subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when I go live. And if you are one of my Patreons, I want to thank you much for supporting this work. And until next time, cheers.